This is the first episode of Elections India on Democracy News Live. Now, what we are going to be doing at Democracy News Live is analyzing the idea of democracy and not just be talking about partisan politics. That's not what our purpose is. Our purpose is to look at elections, is to look at polling and realize why people vote for one party or the other. And we're going to look at the ideas of how to run a good democracy. We seem to be facing a challenge globally around the idea of democracy. And that's why I have with me Colonel Mukul Saxena. Colonel Mukul Saxena has been at Harvard just recently, creating a model along with him and his team on how he's going to be handling the ideas of democracy. And we want to talk to him. He's just returned from Chhattisgarh after making an intervention in one of the constituencies to test his model. Let's get the idea of what it means for him to be doing what he's doing and exactly what he's doing. So, Mukul, you went and you intervened in a constituency which was with one party earlier for the last many years, and you made an intervention and you say that because of this intervention the seat's going to actually swing. Tell me exactly what have you done here?
Hi Rohit, and good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me here. And yes, you're right. I say that yes, I will be able to swing the seat. And I take the point from what you mentioned, it's not about partisan politics, and I start my whole intervention with the idea, with a question: can you change the idea of voting only through partisan politics, or really you can add value to the idea of voting? And that's what the central idea when I went to the constituency there. And that is a constituency that has been a traditional stronghold of one of the major political parties. And
how long is that?
For the since independence.
Wow.
And despite the fact that the government in power has not been able to swing any vote for the last 3 terms for which it was in power. So for me the challenge was how to intervene, and the question was right on the face: can you really create the value to change and convince voters that there is change possible in the same constituency? So what I did was that I looked at the entire constituency statistics and then tried to identify where the swing margin was about 50%. So which implied that you only identified those particular voters, and then you go into the idea of making the voters understand that voting is a value. And it's very important with the kind of scenario which is running around. And thus I intervened through what I call as enter the voter's mind in the last 20 meters to the election voting machine.
So what you're saying is you're capable of actually understanding the voter, telling him what the value is of his vote, and convincing him to now vote for another party. But this would just then, somebody will turn around and say, what you're doing is what many of these agencies claim, is that we will help you as a politician, give us X amount of money and we will swing your vote and we'll make sure you win, or at least we will try to make you win. Couldn't this be up for abuse then?
You're absolutely right. I mean, you introduce a model, there are many ways to look at it. And I agree with you that this can be abused. And that is where my guiding principle has been, that for me, going into the particular constituency was about the candidate's profile, and he being the disruptor in the total political scenario, where he says, well, I will create change. And you look at, and that's what my basis of checking was, that he was committing to change, and he had the history that he has shown in the past that he is willing to change. So that is my kind of understanding, that I will not like to side with the candidate where I feel that there is a possibility.
So you will go out and check the candidate yourself, you will do the verification yourself, and say, do I want to make sure that I want to align with the value system of this candidate, and is this value system better than the other candidate?
Absolutely, otherwise my system also fails the idea of democracy. I mean, if I'm also going to do the same thing of just canvassing blindly, I think then my responsibility as a citizen as well is lost. So I look at the candidate's profile. I will ensure that he has a vision that is aligned to the electorate who is voting. Because ultimately, if you see, what is democracy all about? It's about representation. And there has to be a political will to create change. And how can that come? it cannot come by voting for a particular party, but instead voting for a candidate who aligns to the values enshrined in the democratic process.
So, what we see globally is almost democracy failing, whether we look at the United States, we look at India, Pakistan, the world. We're looking the world over, and democracy seems to be under threat. What's going on from your perspective? You've been studying this at Harvard for a while.
I think we all agree that we're passing through troubled times, be it the United States, Europe, and even our region. And there's a typical pattern of populism sweeping in, where the democratic setup fairly elects a candidate. But the very candidate or the party tends to subvert the checks and balances in the democracy and thus seeping in authoritarianism.
What do you, and please, I want you to kind of open this up for me a bit. When you say they do get the populist vote,
yes,
they win the elections,
yes,
but then they subvert the democracy. And how do they do that?
You see, it's like a Robin Hood image, when you say in your agendas, you say, well, I will do A, B, and C. I will get back something for you. I will give something to you. And so I'll take away from the rich, give it to the poor, and this kind. But in all this process, you begin to subvert the judicial process. You even try to overlook the executive. You look at the autonomous institutions like the election commissions, everything gets subverted in this process. And the larger mandate agrees to this idea because they feel that this is the only way you can change, because somewhere down the line, they are disenchanted by the idea of democracy until now. So you see a pattern that has emerged over the years, in the last 10, 15 years. And that's what we are also seeing it. So that is how the change, and my model tries to arrest this change, where it says don't go for partisan politics or don't. And then you intervene because you feel that there is a candidate who will truly represent you. And that is how I wish to create the change. That's where the answer for this kind of politics is or lies.
So what Mukul is talking about is saying that we will look at democracies, we will try and figure out what is the right model for it to be. The present form certainly doesn't seem to work because it's subverting the processes of the democracy. And somewhere down the line, after, the election happens with a populist vote, we still follow the procedure of voting and all of that. But a few years down the line, everything gets lost because a dictatorial regime comes in place. And dictatorial regimes are going to be a problem going forward. Do you see that?
Yes. Countries are built up on the question of diversity, inclusion. But the very moment you have authoritarian regimes or populist authoritarianism which is there, you suddenly see there's an exclusion. The majority seems to get the larger voice, and you begin to deafen the ears of many of the minority issues. So kind of inclusion doesn't become the parameter, because the image is that yes, I have to move it forward. So the inherent checks and balances which ensure this kind of robustness begin to wean away. So that's the idea, that's the larger perspective in which I look at democracy, and that is why I feel that now voting has to look at the idea of the kind of candidate you're trying to select, instead of just going by party.
So Mukul, thank you very much. To get a good sense of, how this is going to unfold and how you're going to be selecting candidates who you will kind of strategize with to win elections because they add value to the democracy. Absolutely. Is going to be an important part. So what Mukul is doing is he's looking at democracies. He's saying, I will only align myself with candidates who pass the test of aligning with his program. And then he will work in those constituencies to intervene, to talk to the voter and convince why this value system is better, how this aligns better to a democracy. And going forward, dictatorial democracies wouldn't exist, and you will actually have a real democracy where you will have leaders with a value system who are there to represent you and not be just there as salesmen for corporations and companies and ideologies which may not be aligned to the world we are looking to have. Thanks for watching Democracy News Live, and we'll continue our election coverage.